This PetX Talk is brought to you by Pet World Media Group, your partner in all things pet media. Additional funding and considerations provided by Natura Pets, Found Animals, and Dogwise Publishing. Are you ready to be empowered? Then join us for this PetX Talk.
Hello pet parents, and welcome to another edition of PetX Talks. My name is Kim Surber, and I have 25 years as an experienced chemist, and I'm working with Horn's Animal Wellness Team. Today I'd like to speak to you about stinky pet odors, specifically ammonia, and how it affects your cats and your horses and small animals. Ammonia is very harmful for your animals. I call it the silent pet killer because it decreases the lifespan of your pet. OSHA, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, has come out with some exposure limits for workers in industry and the farm industry. What they do is they take an average weight of a man, which is 150 pounds, and they ratio this out to determine what is the best level that they can set, or the minimum level that they can set for ammonia exposure for workers. And that level is 25 parts per million. Well, if you ratio that down to a small animal, such as a little tiny hamster, you can go from 25 parts per million for a human down to 0.04 parts per million for a little small animal. So since there's no industry standards for pets, I want to talk to you today about what you as a pet parent should know about ammonia and what you can do to mitigate ammonia in your home or your horse stalls. So what is it that pet parents need to know about ammonia and ammonia exposure with their pets? Well, what is ammonia? It's a colorless gas that stinks really bad. And we as humans can smell that ammonia as low as 3 parts per million. Well, where does it come from? Well, ammonia comes from bacterial interactions between urine, feces, bedding, and in the environment. And so what can you expect if your pet is exposed to ammonia? You can expect to see sneezing, coughing, runny eyes, runny nose, vomiting, and diarrhea for low levels of exposure. And for higher levels of exposure, you can expect to see bronchitis, pneumonia, changes in their trachea and their lungs, and even death, which is why I refer to it as the silent pet killer. So let's talk a little bit about small animals. So if you take a hamster, which only weighs 0.2 pounds, you can see that if you ratio down the human exposure, which is 25 parts per million, down to what a little 2.2 pound hamster can be exposed to, the levels reduce to less than 1 part per million. So by the time you as a human smell it at 3 parts per million, your little guy's already being exposed to harmful ammonia. So what can you do as a pet parent if you have a small animal? Well, I would suggest having an open cage concept. The new trend I know is to have the really cool mazes and all the different pieces and parts that come together to create a big playground for them. But unfortunately, there's nowhere for this ammonia gas to go. It's trapped inside that cage. So I would suggest that you have an open air plan where lots of air can circulate in that cage and give your pet more chances to breathe healthy air. You can also add 2 to 3 inches of bedding so that the top layer absorbs urine and some moisture from the air or maybe from your water bottle. And that way the bottom of your cage is not a breeding ground for this bacteria, which creates ammonia from the urine and feces. I would also monitor your water bottle. If it's not at the appropriate level, you can have extra drippings from this water bottle. And that increases the moisture in the cage, and moisture in the cage increases the bacteria, and more bacteria is more ammonia. Also, I would recommend that you clean the cage at least 2 to 3 times per week and not wait to the weekends to make that change. Because remember, when you can smell it, he's already being affected by it. So let's switch animals now. Let's talk about cats, which is my favorite pet. I have 3. So I'm a pretty good expert on the stinky cat box smell at my house. So cats typically weigh between 10 and 15 pounds. So if you ratio that human number of 25 ppm down to that of a 10 or 15 pound cat, you're talking about exposure limits of less than 3 parts per million, which is right at where you as a human can smell it. And then 5 to 10 days of a stinky cat box, the ppm ammonia can get to be between 10 and 15 parts per million, which is extremely harmful, although they're only being in the box for 2 to 3 minutes at a time. So what can you as a pet parent do for stinky cat odors and ammonia exposures for your cats? Well, the first thing that I could recommend is having an open litter box. I know that's not very popular these days because you don't want your friends and family to see the cat box nor smell the cat box. And so the trend is to have really beautiful furniture with the cat box inside so that you can hide the box and hide the smell. But unfortunately, what you're doing is you're allowing the ammonia vapors to build up in this furniture, so when your kitty goes inside, even though he's in there for only a few minutes, he's still being exposed to high levels of ammonia. So I recommend that you clean your box every day to remove those clumps and those feces, because the more that you do that, the less chance you will have of bacteria growing in your box. And weekly, I suggest that you take the whole pan and you dump it out. And as you'll see in the bottom, there'll be dust and residual feces and urine. And that's where residual bacteria will just grow and continue to grow. And it's still there when you dump new litter on. So I recommend that you clean it out using an antimicrobial soap or Clorox before you add your fresh litter back in. I also recommend that you use a clumping clay litter. Clumping clays take the urine and make a tight clump so that it's easy to keep the moisture in, as well as it's easy to scoop out. If you use a natural bedding, know that the natural breakdown of bacteria with corn and pine and aspen will be additional ammonia generation. So stick with the clumping clay. In industry, with cat litter manufacturers, their #1 trend is odor control. So all of your major brands and your private labels are working on odor control solutions. So currently on the market, you have neutralizing agents. These are chemicals that are put in the cat litter in order to neutralize the ammonia once it's generated. The problem with that is once those neutralizing chemicals are used up, then you have to continuously add new litter to prevent that ammonia smell. The other thing that they do is they add a lot of absorbers, such as zeolite, which will absorb in and pull in the urine, which allows it to stay tight clumped with the clay and therefore not generate as much ammonia. And of course, the all-time favorite is to add a fragrance. And you and I both know that fragrance only masks that smell and typically only lasts for 24 hours. And so what do? You have to dump in more cat litter. And the last recommendation that I have is if you feed your cat a high protein diet, you will need to manage this, because the higher protein content foods creates higher bacterial counts in the intestines of your cat. And of course, what's in the intestines usually ends up in the box. And the final thing I'd like to speak with you today is ammonia odors in horse stalls and barns. We've all been in a horse barn and smelt that overwhelming smell. It's indicative to a horse barn. And that's a combination of urine smells, ammonia, and feces, with ammonia being the #1 odor that you smell. When horses urinate, they pee a lot, anywhere from 1 to 1.5 gallons each time they go. And unfortunately, it doesn't stay in one nice little spot. It trickles down underneath the bedding into the floor, whether it's a concrete floor, a wood floor, a dirt floor, or even a mat. And what happens is once it gets in the flooring or under the mat, it's just a breeding ground for bacteria, and they grow at exponential levels. That is why you smell such high levels of ammonia in a horse stall. So horses are quite large animals, around 1,000 pounds typically. So you would think that they could be exposed to quite a bit of ammonia without it affecting them. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Around 300 parts per million is really all that they need to be exposed to in a very short time frame. You can go in a stall on a typical day and read up to 260 parts per million, anywhere up to 400. And down at the floor mat, the levels are even higher than that. And then when you take one stall and you add it to a stall or a barn that has 25 stalls in it, that amount can be very, very dangerous. So what can you as pet parents do? Well, first of all, if you have a baby foal, you really need to pay attention to how often you're changing the bedding. So with baby foals, they cannot tolerate very high levels of ammonia, and studies have shown that foals that are raised in the pasture versus in the stall have a significant longer lifespan. Foals that are inside of a stall actually will show symptoms of tracheal and lung damage. Sometimes horses can spend as much as 23 hours a day in a stall. So you can imagine if you're smelling anywhere from 300 to 400 plus parts per million of ammonia, what that does to your horse's trachea and their lungs. So you need to look for the runny nose, the sneezing, even depression in horses when they're in a stall that many hours a day. So what can you as pet parents do? Well, the one thing that I would recommend is to increase air circulation, either by having fans or air conditioning units. I realize that this can get expensive, so I'll give you some less expensive alternatives. The most important thing is that you clean the stall daily, and not just the fecal matter, but the urine spots as well. You need to try to get as much of that soaked bedding out of the stall as possible. Also, if you are using a high protein diet, just like with cats, it will increase the amount of bacteria that ends up in your stall. So you will need to manage your horse's diet. There are also numerous litter amendments that are on the marketplace today, and you can actually add those to the stall, to the wet spot. Unfortunately, they're mainly neutralizers. So again, just like with cat litter, you can put it in the stall and it'll knock the ammonia smell down, but then the very next day it's back up to a high level. So you just have to repeat this process. And the last recommendation that I have is that you clean the flooring underneath the bedding on a regular basis. When horses stand in wet bedding for significant periods of time, they can develop hoof disease or hoof rot, which is not good for your pet at all. So as a chemist, I know all too well the dangers of working with ammonia. Unfortunately, we don't talk to pet parents or the general public about ammonia exposures very often. So I hope that this PetX talk has shed some light and help you understand the importance of reducing the amount of ammonia that your pet is exposed to. Remember, do all that you can to reduce ammonia in your small animal cage, in your cat litter box, and your horse stall, because ammonia is a very harmful chemical, and as I say, it can be a very silent pet killer.
We're here with Kim Surber after her eye-opening talk about ammonia. Kim, I want to ask you, when it comes to ammonia, what is the outcome that we typically see because of ammonia exposure?
Well, unfortunately, it really happens over time, and it is just being exposed to ammonia on a daily basis. It is a reduction in lifespan. So if you look at your hamster, their typical lifespan is 2 to 3 years, but most parents will tell you that it's about a year of lifespan for their hamsters, and that's because they're sitting in a cage that has extremely high levels of ammonia, and it affects their trachea and their respiratory system, and they just die.
What is the simplest and most effective way for pet parents to deal with ammonia?
The best thing that pet parents can do is to clean the cages, clean the boxes, and clean the stalls. It's all about cleaning. Clean, clean, clean. The more that you reduce the bacterial count in your cage, in your box, in your stall, the less ammonia that you will have generated, because it all goes back to bacteria, urine, and feces. So clean, clean, clean.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for sharing all this great information with us. We really appreciate everything you're doing in the pet world. It makes a big difference.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this PetX Talk. For more information from Kim Surber, visit ethorn.com/animal wellness. Funding for PetX Talks is provided by Pet World Media Group, your partner in all things pet media. Additional funding and considerations for PetX Talks is provided by Natura Pets. Natura Pets can help you optimize your pet's health with premium organic supplements from the Amazon and Andes Mountains. Visit naturapets.com. Dogwise Publishing, all things dog. For all of your expert dog book needs, visit dogwise.com. Found Animals, working towards big ideas that advance the safety and happiness of animals in our homes, our shelters, and everywhere in between. Visit foundanimals.org. Special thanks to Pet World Insider, taking you inside the world of pets. Visit petworldinsider.com for more expert radio interviews, articles, and videos. This has been a Pet World Media Group production.